Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. We are recording this episode on July 10th, and Joshua Houtz, I gotta say, I cannot believe it, but rookies are reporting to training camp next week. You better check your pulse if you're not fired up, my friend.
Yeah, check your pulse if you're not fired up, and then a week after that, it'll be the veterans, and everyone has their eyes on that with maybe the quarterback will show up, maybe he won't, but we're not going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa in this episode. We're going to talk about our Jordyn Brooks, a nice signing. We're going to do one of our book clubs. I nicknamed it the Brooks Club, but before we get into that, yeah, you like that? Before we get into that, Jake, how's your week been? You said it's July 10th. How's the week been going so far? Midway, Camel Day?
We are fully immersed into windows down season. We have the sunroof open, and Josh, I think I'm accepting that my favorites, everyone I think has that one song they go to when the windows get rolled down. I think I gotta go with I Believe in a Thing Called Love by the Darkness. It just hits, dude. It just hits so nice.
That's actually, I think, where I started to grow my hair out at that point. I think I remember in high school, and I was like, oh, man, so, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I thought you were going to say, like, Miley Cyrus Party in the USA or something like that. I pretty much just have Moss Mouse just playing different CDs. But, yeah, man, nothing wrong with I Believe in a Thing Called Love.
Just listen to the rhythm of the heart. Did you just say you're listening to CDs? Was that a thing you admitted?
Oh, no. Yeah, I did. I did. And I'm not even sure. I'm not going any further. I'm not sure which plug I need to use my phone in my. I'm out. I'm an old.
I love
dude.
this.
Just remember that.
I love this. But Josh, for the perfect segue, when you start checking off the boxes where the Miami Dolphins got into free agency, right? We knew they didn't have a lot of money to work with. We knew there were cap casualties, Xavier Howard, Jerome Baker. They couldn't re-sign players like Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins. The Dolphins were relatively hamstrung when you consider what they needed to do to rebuild this roster. But you start going down the list, the Dolphins were able to sign a 26-year-old former first-round pick that started 16 games in each of the last 3 seasons. Josh, that seems like a sick deal.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we had to get rid of Jerome Baker. I think I'd written down he was making roughly $12 million a season. I know when he originally signed that contract, I was pretty stoked because I thought, his best football was ahead of him, whether it was injuries, different systems, whatever it was. He didn't quite work out here. I'll admit, coming into this, I thought Jordyn Brooks was significantly younger, but it looks like Baker turns 28 this Christmas. So not about 2 years significant difference. But when you look at the salary, like I mentioned, $12 million for Jerome Baker, you're giving Jordyn Brooks, a 3-year deal worth $30 million, which if you take a closer look at that, this season, he's only making roughly $3 million. That jumps up to $10 million next season and then $10 million after that. So the way it's structured, Dolphins do have an out after this year, but I believe when looking at the tape, they not only got younger, but they got better. And as we'll talk about, Jordyn Brooks, he's more of that old school type of linebacker that we've come to love, but has a lot of bit of that new school style. And honestly, seems like the perfect fit for this defense.
Let's talk about that contract for a second, and I don't want this just to be just hucking out a bunch of numbers, so please try to stick with me. The deal came out as a 3-year, $26 million deal, and Josh, I think that's bananas. His cap hit as the starting will linebacker, I'm fairly certain there, for the Dolphins next year, he's going to account for $3.3 million. That is roughly 1.07% of the salary cap. Josh, Jordyn Brooks has a void year in 2027 when he was not under contract with the Dolphins, where he will account for 1.1% of the salary cap. Does that scare you just a little bit that we're 3-4 years down the road and, Jordyn Brooks, we're excited. He signed a 3-year, $26 million contract to come in here. The Dolphins didn't have a lot of resources, but, and don't, dude, it's 1% of the salary cap. That's not the point. But are you a little worried that we're going to be, looking 2-3 years in the future and all of a sudden there's void years for 45 different players that we don't even remember taking snaps for the Dolphins?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think Shaq Barrett was one of those other guys that they got, signed with a void years here and there. I'm sure there's other ones that we don't even know about yet. But it just goes to show you the Dolphins are kicking this can down the road and hoping to win something meaningful over these next few years. So I guess that's the way I look at it. But again, I feel like they've upgraded here. What are your thoughts, Jake? Let's talk about Jordyn Brooks and what you saw to him when you watched that tape, because this is a guy who ran a 4.5440. He has that speed. I'd written down they started every game after his rookie season with the Seattle Seahawks. And let's be honest, we know how good the Seattle Seahawks have been over the years. We know how, you look around the league, that's been one of those consistent defenses throughout the NFL. And part of that has to be because of the way those linebackers played with Jordyn Brooks. So give me some thoughts on him, and let's talk our way through this book club because it's been a while.
The thing that blew my mind, the first note I found, is that Jordyn Brooks tore his ACL in January of 2023. He was good to go opening day. Josh, you just said it. He played every game last season. We're raving about him, right? A 26-year-old. He's got that versatility. So why was he a free agent? Why did he become a free agent? And I think that's kind of where we start our focus in on. It reminded me in a sense of Austin Jackson, where the Dolphins were thinking about, are we going to give this guy a fifth-year option on his rookie deal? Austin Jackson, another player from the 2020 draft, actually just like Jordyn Brooks. The Dolphins were having conversations, but Jackson got hurt. He couldn't finish the season. It made sense not to give him the fifth-year option. Jordyn Brooks, the Seattle Seahawks didn't give him that fifth-year option because it was the same. It was the same idea. It was that same mentality of, well, he's coming off the torn ACL. We don't know if he's going to be ready to start the season. And Josh, the fact he was able to not only be ready for opening day, but play 16 games, it's impressive as all hell.
Yeah, it really is. And it goes to show this guy's like, I don't want to say superhuman, but it kind of feels that way when this guy, is healing that fast. He's out there starting every game. I think I had written down 111 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, 4.5 sacks. And I think he actually had a season where he had almost 100, I believe it was 186 combined tackles. I wish I had written down, but I mean, the guy is just all over the field. And I mean, it's no knock against Jerome Baker that I say that I believe this is an upgrade, but I mean, I think, I really do believe it is when you put on the tape, and I want to dive into that a little bit more here, Jake.
Do you think that inside linebacker has been a bit of a weakness for the Dolphins in past years? I think Landon Roberts is one player I think we look back on a little friendlier than we might have at the time. I mean, I always hyped him up for being the dude who tackled a dude through another dude, but overall, I don't think we ever kind of felt that the Dolphins had a strength at inside linebacker since, I'm going to go back Carlos Dansby, Kevin Burnett.
Yeah, we always go back to that. That's kind of what we talked about for a couple of years now on this podcast. Was every year, the linebacker unit, we need to find somebody. We need to go back to those, days. And I've written down, is this the best one since that tandem? We had Carlos Dansby, we have Kevin Burnett, and then the Dolphins thought, okay, we're going to get younger. I don't know if that's the right thing to say when I'm sitting here saying we're getting younger in this situation, but they went with Ellerbe and Wheeler. Absolute failure. After that was Koemisi, Jelani Jenkins, Kiko Alonso was in there. Jerome Baker, Raekwon McMillan, I absolutely love that. Koemisi, Sam McGuavin, Landon Roberts. So we've been using every different tandem, left and right. Duke Riley, got to throw his name out there as well. But now you got David Long Jr., who I think had 100 tackles last season, looked pretty darn good with the Miami Dolphins. You got Jordyn Brooks coming in, similar style, can do a little bit of everything. My biggest question is which one of these guys is going to wear that green dot and be that, I guess quarterback of the defense in the middle of it, but that's a good problem to have when you're talking about how this has been a weakness for so many years. It finally looks like Anthony Weaver's going to have a complete defense, I guess, for lack of a better word.
If we're talking about the blue dot, I think it's going to be, I think you look at David Long Jr. as the heart of the defense. It's just how it's built. I looked last year about how Jordyn Brooks was used with the Seahawks, and the Seahawks were an interesting team because they actually used a lot of dime packages. Jordyn Brooks was available for all 16 games, played 16 games, but Josh, he played 67% of the team's defensive snaps. He wasn't on the field just as much as we kind of expected. Billy Wagner, on the other hand, was on the field for... Oh man, Josh, do we got to cut that? It's not Billy Wagner, is it?
It's Bobby. You were. I thought that was your nick. You do these cute nicknames. I thought. Yeah, we'll cut it though. But
no, we're leaving that. We're leaving that.
I was like, oh, that's amazing. He's gonna call him Billy. I was like, I'm gonna start calling him Billy.
But he was on the field at 34 years old last year. I only had Wagner written down. My bad. He played 98% of snaps for that Seattle Seahawks defense. So when I look at how this Dolphins defense is transitioning for the future, I do kind of think that it will be David Long as that main featured linebacker. But I think Jordyn Brooks, what I really liked about his film, yes, he had over 100 total tackles. He forced one fumble. He had an interception return for a touchdown. But think about the AFC East. Josh Allen, very mobile quarterback. Drake May, projected to be a very mobile quarterback. Nobody wants to talk about the Jets. So what really stood out to me about Jordyn Brooks wasn't necessarily the tackles or the way he could line up on the line of scrimmage and collapse into the offensive line to open up blitzing lanes. It was the comfort he felt in the zone where you could see him, kind of do the step, okay, go get the quarterback. And I think that's really what the Dolphins on defense need, is just somebody who has those instincts to not only protect the weaknesses, that is the middle of the field for a lot of defenses, but know when it's time to cut it off and go get the quarterback. And I think that's such a hard game to play. And that, I think, is why the Dolphins have struggled with the Bills so much. Maybe Jordyn Brooks can be the guy to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of joked at one point that could be Channing Tindall. That could, be that. Oh man, I don't even want to talk about it. But I mean, I think what you're saying is, he has those instincts, right? He doesn't get fooled by the RPOs and things like that. He knows when to stay home and be patient, and that was kind of what I think really stood out to me in the run game, was the fact that you'd see him kind of just flow with the play and then wait and then explode through the hole, make the tackle. You mentioned how he's going to be a game changer going against some of those more mobile quarterbacks, but then you also talked about how he can protect the middle of the field. And I think that's what has always stood out to me. We always said how. Well, we just discussed how we needed linebacker help for many, many years, but I feel like we still have never really had that presence in the middle of the field that could be, quote unquote, a coverage linebacker. And I don't want to sit here and say, but I almost said Billy Wagner. I don't want to sit here and say Jordyn Brooks is, an elite coverage linebacker. I don't even think you'd say the same thing about David Long, but I think those are both upgrades of what we've seen in years past. So bringing in Jordyn Brooks, the guy who can, I mentioned 4.54 speed at the combine. I mean, those were years ago. But this is a guy who can get to a spot, who can cover well, and doesn't really seem to be a liability in coverage that we saw in years past. You mentioned Wagner seeing 98% of the snaps. I guess my only question would be, I wonder how much of that was them maybe easing along Jordyn Brooks. You mentioned him having roughly 64% of those snaps. Maybe it's because of that injury, him coming back like a superhero, that they thought, okay, we'll get the most out of Bobby Wagner this year and let him fully recover. But whatever it is, again, I think this guy has been sliding under the radar. And I think when you think about what Anthony Weaver wants to do here, kind of replicate what we see with the Baltimore Ravens. Everyone wanted Patrick Queen. When you saw the Jordyn Brooks signing, when you see what he can do on tape, I mean, I'm as happy as a pig in poop.
The Dolphins are really betting on the future here, and you got to take some risks when the Dolphins had their hands tied behind their backs a little bit with the salary cap and these different things. You aren't going to be able to sign the top tier free agents. I think the deal to sign Jordyn Brooks was fantastic. I think you see the vision, but the Dolphins are hoping he's somebody who can come in and take that next step. You mentioned the Baltimore Ravens and what Anthony Weaver wants to do with this unit, Josh. Do you think that either Patrick Queen or Roquan Smith played anywhere close to 67% of snaps for the Ravens last year?
No.
Smith, 92%. Queen, 98%. Wow. I don't know, Josh. When you think about everything we've heard from Weaver so far this offseason, do we think that you look at guys like David Long Jr. and Jordyn Brooks and say, all right, they're going to be on the field that much? Or are you getting the impression that even the Dolphins are going to try a little harder to be that defense that is just doing so many different things to make so many different players comfortable, where maybe Jordyn Brooks is still going to see maybe 70 to 75% of the snaps?
Yeah, oh man, that's a great question. Something that we definitely are going to have to keep an eye on, because that was kind of something I'd written down. Who's that guy behind them, right? Who's going to be that depth that can come in? I know you love Anthony Walker and what he did with the Browns. I know he wears that captain's patch. I admittedly just overlook him all the time, so I can't wait for him to go out there and be a menace. He has that visor as well. So I root for those guys. Channing Tindall, I'm still waiting to do something. Duke Riley had 30 tackles last season, so. I mean, when I'm naming off those players, I almost feel like I'd rather have Jordyn Brooks out there at David Long, right? I mean, so when you were sitting there saying that, I was trying to envision this. So I'm picturing Roquan Smith being our Jordyn Brooks being our Roquan Smith, and then the 98% the Patrick Queen being David Long Jr. I mean, I guess if you're looking at it from that perspective, I don't know, man. I think Anthony Walker's going to have a bigger role, like you mentioned before, than myself and maybe some other people think.
A name I think that could be a dark horse, and then you might, hit me through the monitor here, Josh, but you got to remember that Jordan Poyer is somebody who played, I think, 400 snaps in the box last year, too. So I'm very interested to see how the Dolphins try to protect themselves from the middle of the field, because I think that was at least one of my bigger gripes last year. Like, it was annoying to see that Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey, two of the best cornerbacks in the league, the Dolphins defense really couldn't lean in and make opposing quarterbacks throw the ball at them. And instead, near the end of the year, you had James Cook going off. You had Justice Hill going off. And I think what the Dolphins are going to try to do here is shore up that middle of the field with, by hell or high water. If it's not going to be a safety, it's going to be a linebacker. And if it's not going to be a linebacker, we'll have Zach Sealer running back there.
I mean, if that Zach Sealer wants to prove they didn't need Christian Wilkins, that's the way to do it, right? Just have him play all 11 positions out there on the field. But you mentioned, Jordan Poyer coming down and maybe being that presence in the middle alongside to help out, alleviate some of that. But that's the same thing that we can say with Javon Holland as well. And we talk about maybe what Jalen Ramsey's going to do this year, move around a little bit more. I love that, to think about those guys, being that security blanket to those guys up front, Jordyn Brooks and David Long. Again, I get overexcited thinking about it, but I don't know how much that's the homer me or just a guy that sees a playmaking linebacker, that kind of reminds us of the days of the Kevin Barnetts and Carlos Dansby's.
It's so easy to get hyped up about these signings, in April, in March when free agency begins. But Josh, after watching some film and digesting what Brooks brings to the table, is it that same level of hype, or is there a little bit of maybe this might be more of a double signing compared to like a home run people were calling it originally?
Yeah, can we go to the triple? Is that a real cop out? I mean, I'm going to be honest. I had a cut up. It's about 10 minutes long. I had it ready to go back in March, and I don't know why I have not posted. I was trying to do commentary over it. So I went back today and looked at it, and I think it is. I think this is I'll say a triple. I don't know if it's that home run signing. I honestly don't know what I consider a home run signing at this point. But I think that what he brings to the table, again, he's younger. I know we want to compare the two between him and Jerome Baker for the last part of the show, but I think his instincts in the run game, like I mentioned before, his ability to flow with the offensive line and then shed blocks. He plays more physical than I expected. And I mean, this guy looks like a thumper that can drop back in coverage. So I think it's a triple. I think it's a guy who's going to have a big role here in Miami. And again, I think that contract's what really stuck out to me. Right before we were getting on here, you told me to look up the missed tackle statistic, and I did that. And then that's when I saw the contract, and I was like, this thing's structured crazy. And with Spotrac saying this could be an out year, I mean, it just made my eyes, pop out. But then I thought to myself, if they were planning on paying Jerome Baker, $12 million per season, you're paying Jordyn Brooks at worst $10 million after this year. I mean, that's still a younger player that, again, as we'll talk about, I believe is an upgrade over Baker.
Yeah, so 2.6 mil year one, 10 million. And that's awesome for a guy who's going to, if he's still on the roster, 28 in his prime, that is like the ideal scenario to have that work out, where you could really rely on him and David Long Jr. to be those two dudes in the middle for an extended period of time. Josh, a career high 4.5 sacks in 2023. Would you be more surprised to see Brooks exceed that in his first year in the Dolphins, or regress back to where he was in 2022 and 2021? Both years he only had 1 sack apiece.
I think I'll stick with the 4.5, especially if I'm projecting him to see over 85% of the snaps, right? I mean, I'd say over that, but again, it depends on how he's utilized. What do you say, Jake? You think it's going to be more? There's a lot of mouths to feed out there. What do you think?
That's a tough one, because it's hard to look at the Dolphins pass rush and feel good about it early in the season. Man, it's going to be interesting to see. It depends on how aggressive they are early in the year. I think it's going to be such a unique feeling, because Vic Fangio and Josh Boyer, the last two defensive coordinators we've had, we kind of knew what was going to happen, right? Vic Fangio, it's that zone defense. We're going to bring 4 and we're going to get to you. We're going to simulate some blitzes, simulate some pressures, but post snap, you're going to see what you're going to get. And then Josh Boyer, right, it was throwing the kitchen sink at you. So, God, dude, I don't know. Like, I don't want to just cop out here, but I probably want to lean a little closer to that 1 sack. I think the Dolphins are really going to try to focus on limiting that middle of that field, and whether it's using Brooks to simulate some pressures, I'm not entirely sure. But who knows? That's the mystery of the Dolphins in 2024.
That's $1 million question. I think early on they are going to use some of that pressure. I mean, if you watch the tape, you see Jordyn Brooks, he's pretty good at, blitzing, at least up the middle. I think that was one of the things I really liked about Jerome Baker, was his ability off the edge. But I think early on, if we can see him, shooting those gaps, I think we might see a 2-sack game, and then I'm going to have to go back in the archive and clip this thing.
So think about how this offseason unfolded, Josh. The Baltimore Ravens are one of the best teams in the NFL. Averaged or allowed 16 points per game. I think the numbers simmered down to 14 points per game over the final 3 seasons of the year. You have coaches being signed left and right. Anthony Weaver goes to the Miami Dolphins, and then you have Mike Macdonald, the defensive coordinator last year, taking over as head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. The Dolphins decided to cut Jerome Baker as a cap casualty, right? They signed him to, I think it was a 3-year, $39 million deal in 2022. He was projected to have like a 4% of the total cap hit this season. The Dolphins said, all right, this is a player we feel we got to move on from, not necessarily because of the talent. I think Jerome Baker is the ideal jack of all trades as a linebacker. Like, you don't see him getting accolades year after year, but a consistent starter who's filling up stats. It's the fact he doesn't have like a league high 6 interceptions or the sack numbers really balloon. And I think that would have been the difference between seeing him as like a Pro Bowl player or just a fan favorite like he was. The Dolphins cut Jerome Baker and signed Jordyn Brooks from the Seattle Seahawks. The team that was negotiating with Brooks. He spent his first 4 seasons there. And Mike Macdonald, the coach of the Baltimore Ravens last year, decided we don't necessarily think Jordyn Brooks is that ideal fit for this defense. We're instead going to sign the guy the Dolphins cut to a 1-year prove-it contract, while the Dolphins, who are looking for those same traits, who are expected to run that same defense as the former defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, says he's actually the right guy. We're going to sign him to a multi-year deal to come in and be that linebacker for us. Josh, that's a pretty weird scenario when you start to play it all out.
Yeah, and I just, at the end of the year, right or wrong, they're going to be comparing these two side by side. And, we're going to be sitting here nitpicking who got it right, who got it wrong. I think the biggest thing that we got to take from this is, again, Jerome Baker has been a very good player for the Miami Dolphins. I mean, there was one point when the Dolphins signed him that, again, I was okay with that because I thought there was still another level to his game, right? I mean, we've seen it before. We see games where he takes over. I still remember I picture a 20-yard sack against Patrick Mahomes. I think of some, fumble recoveries, return for touchdowns, interceptions. Yeah, he showed up in big games. It was just, I think there was always that another tier that he just could not get to. I think the most interesting thing is that, like you said, that the Dolphins cut ties with him to bring in Jordyn Brooks, and then Seattle Seahawks brought in Jerome Baker. So I've been trying to, I got a little bit excited throughout this entire podcast because I knew we were going to end up comparing the two, but I want to get your thoughts before I dive into it because I continue to lean Brooks, but the more I think about Jerome Baker and all those happy moments, like, you got to remember that this was, at one point, I don't want to say a cornerstone of our defense, but it kind of seemed that way. And and we thought that, I would have been intrigued, I guess, if his salary was less, if he didn't take up so much of that cap space, to see what he could do in an Anthony Weaver defense. I guess that's a long way of what I want to say.
So I've sorry if I've struggled to kind of work around some stats so far because I really wanted to use the stats to compare him to Jerome Baker. And so Jordyn Brooks has played 2,000 less snaps than Jerome Baker. Keep that in mind. About 2-3 year difference there, considering injuries and then everything like that. Jerome Baker has 46 career quarterback hits compared to Brooks having 11. That's just the Josh Boyer effect. That, don't read too much into that. But I think it's interesting when you go to passes defended, Jerome Baker had 21 compared to Jordyn Brooks at 16, despite playing 2,000 less snaps. Josh, I'm sorry I did this to you, but I actually do have completion percentage here. My bad. Baker, 75.2. Brooks, 75.8. And then if you want to dig a little deeper and say yards per target, Baker, 6.81. Brooks, 8.4. Brooks is a little worse there, but Josh, I think it's important to keep in mind here, don't get caught up in that number because the issue isn't necessarily being a lockdown linebacker against running backs. It's not getting beat for the big plays. So I'm not going to be super worried about a 2 yards per reception difference in this scenario when it's, you just make sure you tackle the running back. If it was a massive difference, then all right, maybe we talk about it. My long-winded answer to your long-winded question, welcome to Another Dolphins podcast, is I think for 2024, Jerome Baker is the no-brainer. Like entering the year, you expect him to be better. However, the Dolphins were in a situation where they got to take some risks. They got to take some gambles. They couldn't afford to pay Jerome Baker that $12 million. And Jordyn Brooks, he has that perfect takeoff opportunity, that runway where he could really hit the ground running with the Dolphins. You see the vision, you see the potential, but you're hoping it can all come together. So right now, I'd lean Baker, but man, that potential for Brooks, whether it's me being a homer or just seeing him in a new system, signing that 3-year contract, I could see why you would agree, or say all right, this is the guy of the future, and I completely understand why.
Yeah, and again, I'll be the first one to admit I'm kind of a Homer Simpson all the way. I know a lot of people think I'm negative nowadays, but I still, bleed aqua and orange. So I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, Jordyn Brooks has to be better, right? It does seem like it's almost a coin flip in a sense, but like you mentioned, there was almost 2,000 more snaps that Jerome Baker played. So that has to play a factor into this. The real number that sticks out, at least, the first one I see is 22.5 sacks for Baker, only 6.5 for Jordyn Brooks. We know 4.5 of those came last season, but that was, I think, the biggest difference to me. One thing that really stood out to me is when the Dolphins needed that pressure off the edge. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, year prior, whatever it was, there were some injuries on the defensive line. I mean, that could be any year at this point, but Jerome Baker was rushing off the edge at times. He looked like he was a difference maker coming off the edge. That's where we saw some of those sacks. I think that's the difference in the game between the two. I think other than that, these guys are almost a mirror image. And I think that Jordyn Brooks, again, has that little bit of a more thumper to him, can play more downhill, be more of a run fit. And then I just, again, love the way he plays in coverage, the way he can move his hips, and whether it looks like he bites on play action, he can still get back to his spot. You see him, I think he picked off Justin Herbert when I was watching the tape. So a lot of big plays, and I just hope that it can translate. I hope that what Anthony Weaver needed in the middle of his defense, he found, because Mike McDonald, I guess, hoped that he found Jerome Baker as well.
So dating back to 2022, the Seattle Seahawks blitzed 15% of the time. That was the second lowest in the NFL, behind the Jets. At the same time, the Dolphins were third in blitz rate at 33%. Just different tales, and that's why you see Jerome Baker with those pressure numbers being so much higher. Over the last 3 years, Brooks has actually played one more game than Jerome Baker, and then you're just talking like solo tackles. He has 309 compared to Baker's 249. Where do you rank these guys, Josh? Do you see a scenario here where you're happy with a David Long Jr., Jordyn Brooks combo, and you're calling him the next Kevin Burnett and Carlos Dansby? Because I just do think that looking back to Jerome Baker and looking about how that defense operated, there's going to be scenarios in this Anthony Weaver defense where they're playing to strengths. And I do think there's a lot of Jordyn Brooks blitz opportunities we didn't really see just because the Seattle Seahawks, kind of hold back on that pressure a little bit under Pete Carroll.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at these names that I listed off earlier: Ellerby, Wheeler, Misi, Jenkins, Kiko, Baker, McMillan, Eggman. I mean, Roberts, Jerome Baker, the list goes on, man. And that's been ever since we lost Carlos Dansby and Kevin Burnett. So I don't see why not. I mean, Carlos Dansby was a legit thumper, right? This dude would murder guys in the run game. And while neither of these guys are that true thumper, I think what they can do in the pass coverage is going to be a world of a difference. So yeah, man, I think it's our best linebacking unit since those days. I mean, I'm probably gonna have egg on my face by the time it's all said and done, but even past this, the David Long, the Jordyn Brooks. I mean, you talked about Anthony Walker. You've been hyping him up. Duke Riley has a presence on this team, although I say that now, and he could be one of those cap casualties. I was going to say as a special teamer. And then Channing Tindall, I'm just praying to God he can show that he can do something. But I like that linebacker unit as a whole. I mean, I'm listening off those names, and it could get queasy, but Jordyn Brooks and David Long, I think that's our Carlos Dansby and Kevin Burnett. Maybe we should do that Photoshop.
Training camp's about to kick off, Josh. What would you say is the weakness to this Miami Dolphins defense?
Wow. I guess it still has to be the I mean, I was sitting here hyping up Zach Steele the other day. I think it still needs to be next to him, right? I mean, I know a lot of people felt really good about the Calais Campbell signing, but it sounds like he could be one of those guys that plays more, defensive end, a little bit more on the outside of the defensive line. So I still think next to Zach Sealer, you mentioning, trying to fill that hole left behind by Christian Wilkins, that's the most cliche answer ever. So I'm sorry I didn't give you a better answer than that.
Nah, man, it's a good one. Like, we could spin zone Benito Jones, Neville Gallimore. We can hype up Kier Tart. This is going to be the season
he puts it
all together.
We tried.
We have. Yeah, no, man. And Calais Campbell is going to be that big mover, shaker, and edge rusher. I am so excited for that first week of rookie minicamp because I look at two names. yes, Chop Robinson's going to be awesome. But I look at Mo Kamara, and I think when we did our mock drafts, I actually had the Dolphins drafting. Oh man, they don't even have him listed here.
Murphy, right? Is it Grayson Murphy?
Yeah, who led all of draft eligible prospects with quarterback pressures last year. So, dude, those are two names where I'm like, I can't wait to see Bradley Chubb out there. Jalen Phillips remains in the gym where he's getting, muscles on top of his muscles at this point. It's looking absolutely insane. But you might have to hold me back next week during rookie minicamp when I'm hyping up Kamara and Allen and Murphy as those two I don't know, overhyped rookies, I guess we'll go with.
Basham brothers. No, I'm cool. I'm cool with that. I think we even said that we might see Mo Kamara, be that more of a sack guy this year than Chop Robinson. I want to see something on Chop Robinson too. I mean, I know no matter what happens, we're gonna get overly excited. That's just who we are. So it's just gonna be so nice to be able to get overly hyped. And you mentioned Jalen Phillips. I mean, my God, dude, that dude looks like a Superman, like a legit Superman, like he's from planet Krypton or whatever.
What would be the most disappointing Cam Smith update the first week of training camp?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm trying to Storm Duck is out playing him. I mean, I like Storm Duck. We're all hyped about Storm Duck, right? But Storm Duck was an undrafted guy that they paid money to. So that was my quick thought. I just hope Cam Smith becomes something. I know I'm not allowed to talk about the Madden beta, but dude, his guy, like his character model looks phenomenal, and they always show him on the sideline. So I'm like, are they trying to say that this dude's going to be a superstar? Because you see him all the time on the sideline. I'm like, what the hell are they doing here?
It's going to be I think it's going to boil down for me what position he's playing. If he's taking snaps at slot cornerback, I'm going to be worried if he's going to kind of get drowned out by Kader Kohu and Nick Needham, who I think is probably going to end up being more of a corner than a safety. Famous last words by me. But if he's playing boundary cornerback and you see him as that second guy behind Fuller, behind Ramsey taking snaps, I'd start to get pretty excited because I do think the Dolphins are going to need help at boundary cornerback this season. And weirdly, we kind of just go back to the same thing where I think Cam Smith beating out Storm Duck would be a great sign because I think Duck's one of the players who, I swear it's not because of his name. I think he could kind of settle in and develop a role as that fourth or fifth cornerback. Just someone who's, the way he plays, you're very comfortable knowing that he isn't going to make that mistake that's going to cost you a 60-yard touchdown. He's a very smart cornerback.
Yeah, and one thing shame on me, I'm looking at the quotes I had in here, and I'm not going to read off quotes, but the biggest thing that I forgot to mention was now the Dolphins have Joe Barry in that linebacking room, right? He's the run game coordinator. He's the linebackers coach. We've seen what he was able to accomplish one stop after the next. We know he has a very impressive resume as a linebackers coach. So to think that he's also coming in to add, his voice and, reputation to everything that could really impact that middle linebacker unit more than we expect.
Yeah, former defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers. Just seeing where these guys are going to line up, man, just the Dolphins defense, it just seems like it could be so positionless when you're looking at Jalen Ramsey, Javon Holland, Calais Campbell. You're going to have such a hard time pinning down where these guys are going to be. It's going to be very exciting to watch. But that is it. That is all the time we have today on Another Dolphins podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us for this edition of the Miami Dolphins Book Club. Let us know what you think. The preseason's quickly approaching, so I don't know how many more book clubs we're going to get to, but if you have any suggestions, feel free to send them over to AnotherDolphinsPodcast@gmail.com. But thank you all so much for listening. Go have a great rest of the week. We will be back soon with a new episode, but until then, fins up.
Fins up.